Hello everyone, I'm Johnny Bairstow and welcome to this webinar. Today I'm joined by Steve and George, who you can see they're joining me on the screen there. They will introduce themselves in a bit more detail in a second. But today they're going to be talking about how AI can identify energy waste and energy savings for you. So it's a fascinating topic. I won't go on too long for this introduction. I'll let them get right into it. But before we do that, I'll just run you through some of the housekeeping. So they're going to talk for about 40 minutes, 35, 40 minutes on this presentation. There's going to be video slides, and you can watch this all back on our website later. So don't worry too much about making notes, just enjoy it while it's up there on the screen. And after 40 minutes, we're going to launch into a Q&A session. So you can ask any questions at any time using the features you have on your screen through the BrightTalk platform. Those questions, we will get around to those at the end, but please make sure that you get them in early so that they're at the top of our list and we can get around to answering those. There's also going to be a couple of polls in which we're going to ask a bit of audience involvement. So when those come up on your slides, I will launch those polls and you're going to be able to vote there too. So don't miss out on those, and we'd love to see what you think about some of these issues. So without too much further ado, I'll hand over to George first to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Johnny. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this webinar. As Johnny said, I'm George Cato. I am a director of Quickly, who sits behind the AMR DNA label. My role within the company, realistically, is to listen to clients and to put what energy managers want into practice effectively. And I'm very happy to be joined by Steve, and I'll let Steve introduce himself.
Thanks, George. Good morning, everyone. My name's Steve Crichton. I'm head of member services at Tech, actually doing energy risk management services and data leverage where we can. And yeah, happy to join this webinar this morning just to say, to show what we've been doing in conjunction with Quickly and the tools that they've put at our disposal.
Perfect. Well, thank you both very much for the introductions. And George, I think you might as well get straight into it. So please launch the slides, and I'll see you guys in the Q&A.
Thanks, Johnny. Excellent. So as the title says, we're going to look at how AI can identify energy waste. And then what we're going to try and do is demystify that energy data with AI. So a bit about the background to begin with. I think everyone will agree that at the moment, data has been logged for years. We've seen over the last 10 years a huge number of meters being put in place. I mean, I know that Tech has many of these meters, and that data has been logged for years. And often it's predominantly only used for billing purposes, but there are added benefits as we'll look into. So we'll be able to see how we can use those to our advantage. We also have noticed that viewing portals are common, and I'd like to make the distinction between viewing portals and an analytics platform, in that a viewing portal, you are able to see all of your energy data, but often you look through a sort of a tree structure and you find a site, and then you find the meter that you want to look at, and then you tell it what you would like to see. So a consumption chart over time or a weather correlated chart. So these are available as well. Another one is the energy services are available. There are any number of different energy services that are available out there, from remote dial-in BMSs, facility management companies, a whole host of them. So any job that needs doing can be done these days. We're also noticing at the moment, as we sort of move forward, that net zero is approaching. We know that that's happening, and we have to be forward-looking as to how we're going to get there. And I'm not going to talk about specifically how we get to net zero, but what I'd like to talk about here is making sure that our buildings that we run are as efficient as possible before we look at putting in our net zero sort of strategies. Also, we've seen CSR, corporate social responsibility, sort of morph into environmental social governance. And what we've seen with that is effectively more of a responsibility from senior management when looking at large portfolios to get involved and make sure that portfolios are running as smoothly as possible. Another thing that we've also noticed is, with regards to that, is that customers are generally very much looking at retail portfolios and groups, and they are really noticing what these groups are doing about their environmental and social governance. So it's becoming more of a hot topic moving forward. Finally, and I'm not going to dwell on it, a bit about COVID, future working environments. We've noticed, obviously, there's been absolutely phenomenal changes in the way that we work, in the way that our buildings operate. And we have to be aware of that from an energy management role, as how we can effectively change our strategies to cope with that and still remain efficient. So in summary, the energy management role needs to change. So how do we see the energy data utopia? What we believe is that clients must effectively get instant value. So as soon as someone starts having a dialogue with you with regards to your data, or a software starts having a dialogue with you, there needs to be instant value. That needs to be backed up by irrefutable evidence. So we need to be able to show that turning something off, very simply, will save you money. And another thing that we notice is that people tend to look either in pounds, shillings, and pence, or with regards to carbon. And that needs to be made as visible as possible. It has to be approximate. Obviously, there are lots of complexities when it comes to tariffs, and there are many challenges surrounding that. But giving a very good idea and understanding is a crucial part of that energy data utopia. Simplicity. This one is an absolute crucial one, and me myself have very much learnt this the hard way. We understand that lots of people are not data analytics people, and quite frankly don't like spreadsheets and formulas and things like this. So what we need to be able to do is be able to show people things in a very simplistic manner that is easy to understand and easy to digest. Opportunity. Recommendations demonstrated must be actionable. That's a very obvious one. Obviously, you've got to have a good understanding of a building and how that works to make sure that things are actionable, and rather than saying that a 24-hour supermarket, for instance, can turn off for half of the day. Finally, risk-free. People need to understand what they're getting themselves into, and how that's going to work. So it has to be risk-free with no lock-in. So the problem that we find that energy managers face, big data can't be interpreted by humans. If you imagine data as Wembley Stadium, and you are looking effectively for where a problem starts in that data, it is very hard for a human to identify that. Imagine looking for a person in a crowd and saying, okay, that's middle tier, section B, row D, seat 32, for instance. Very hard to spot when these things happen. And that means that what we need is something to help us do that. Weather services are expensive. If you have a portfolio that is widely dispersed across a large area, whether that be across the UK or Europe or wherever it may be, to get weather data for each of these individual sites and not rely on internal or external sensors to the building, it's an expensive operation. And most of the buildings that we look at in particular, and most of the buildings worldwide, are comfort heated. So effectively, they are using gas or electricity to heat or chill, or in electricity could be both. And you need to have that weather to make sure that they are corresponding correctly. Finally, manual interpretation is time consuming and expensive. Imagine if you've got 300 sites, you've got your gas, your water, and your electricity meters, so 900 fiscal meters. To look through them every single day is an impossible task, and obviously it requires a lot of manpower. So, poll 1, over to you, Johnny.
Thank you very much, George. So yeah, we've got a couple of polls, as I mentioned, that all of the audience can get involved in. And so this webinar is a two-way street for communication. So I'm going to launch the poll now, and the audience will see it appear on their screens. So the question is, how often do you spend, how much time do you spend looking at your energy data in detail? So it's a very interesting question. I'll read out the potential answers for you. The first option is scan your data weekly. And the second is an in-depth review more than once a week. Thirdly, detailed reporting monthly. And the last option is checking that quarterly. So please do get the votes in there. That poll is now open and you'll be able to vote on those. George, how do you think the answers are going to turn out on that one?
So a really interesting question, and obviously why we put it in there. I was at a talk a few years ago talking to a supermarket group with many energy managers. And I asked the question there of about 40 people. And out of that, about 3 or 4 actually put that they looked at their data on a regular basis. So my prediction is that realistically, it's going to be somewhere around the weekly or the monthly, probably with monthly taking the main role, as people just don't have that time to spend looking at it in detail.
Yeah, do you think, where would you advise someone to be looking at it, do you think? Do you think quarterly is too rare?
I absolutely think quarterly is too rare. This is where hopefully the presentation is going to go, is that what we're saying is that data actually needs to be looked at on a very regular basis to give the energy manager a good understanding of what's happening. So being able to support that using artificial intelligence is absolutely crucial.
Perfect. And I think we can take a look at the results of the poll now. That will probably continue to change as we talk, but we've got quite a few votes in now, so we can have a preliminary discussion of those answers. So I'll quickly read those out, George, if you're happy with that. And
absolutely.
Then you can let me know what your feelings are, see if it matched your hypothesis. So we've got 23% so far that are saying they scan their data weekly. So that's pretty encouraging, I'd imagine. And then we've got 9% saying that they conduct an in-depth review more than once a week. So they're really on top of their data there. 40%, which is the biggest chunk so far, say that they do detailed reporting monthly. And 27% actually, so just above a quarter, say they just check that data quarterly, which you suggested probably wasn't the optimal amount of checking.
Yeah, absolutely. These results are very much where we expect to see them, and we totally understand that one of the biggest problems that people have is a lack of time to do these. So I think detailed reporting monthly was very much where we expected to see that poll lie, and it's nice to see that the hypothesis fits the answers.
Perfect.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to move on now. Thank you guys for answering that. It's really useful information to us. So, as I was saying, is artificial intelligence the solution? Now, if we look at that poll result, it's very clear that this time issue is very pressing for people, obviously, and the ability to only look at your data on a monthly is probably not enough. So I'm going to talk about artificial intelligence and what the benefits are of it and how it actually works. So artificial intelligence has been around for a long time, a very long time indeed. Well, I say a long time, 10 to 15, 20 years. Early examples of this are number plate recognition, so using character recognition, and then things like fingerprint scanners, for instance, where people, or they look for whirls and swirls and patterns within a fingerprint and can identify who a criminal is. In effect, people can do this for energy data. So where they see a pattern that corresponds to a real life situation, a software can identify this once it's been taught how to do that. So as we look at this chart, I'm going to give you a few examples of what pattern recognition can look for in energy data. So here we're using fiscal data, fiscal gas data on a half-hourly meter readings. And I'm going to just go through 2 of these particular issues because we find them to be of interest to us. So we've got power here, and then we've got time, and then we've broken down this data into different temperature bands so we can see how buildings correspond, or how this building corresponds to different weather conditions. What we can see is that when it's -5 to 0 degrees, they use more gas. Very much understandable. And then obviously in summer they use less. And then the software here has identified 4. I'm going to go through 2 of these in a bit more detail. So A is an issue with optimum start. This building, I should say, is a school, and it doesn't matter what the outside temperature is going to be or is. This building starts at 4 in the morning. Now, obviously, when you've got people coming in sort of 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, if it's going to be a day when it's going to be hotter than 15 degrees or 10 to 15 degrees on average, you probably don't need to start heating at 4 in the morning, and you can push that optimum start time, or you can push that start time back using an optimum start algorithm. And then D was a really interesting one for us, and really shows how pattern recognition can be used. So if you can notice this slight uptick at the end of each day, what this effectively was, as we were told by the energy manager, was a children being released slightly early from school, so 3:45, and the doors would open and the cold air would rush in. It would trigger the thermostat. It would note that temperature drop, and it would refire the boilers. Now, in most cases, you're going to have a wet heating system in the UK, and that water is going to retain a lot of that heat and effectively enable heating to carry on for after-school activities. And what we were able to do was write an algorithm that actually hunted for this particular uptick at the end of the day. We were able to identify that it was about 30% of these sites had this specific problem. So how does the AI solution effectively work? When you've got portfolios, large portfolios of building, you get a lot of data. You've got your gas, your water, and electricity. And what we effectively do, or what can happen with the AI solution, is that data goes into this system and it runs it through certain checks, whether those are checks that the software has learned to do itself, or whether they are pre-approved checks. It runs through these every single night when it receives data, and then recalculates on the new knowledge that it has. So what that allows for is the software to create an optimum model of what it believes a building is possible to achieve. It also can therefore give recommendations, so it can see when things are going wrong, and then when things are being fixed, or they are being fixed effectively, it can track that progress. Finally, when things are fixed, it can supply the proof of saving to show that the job has been done and the job has been done well. And then obviously it can continue to monitor that every single night and provide continuous improvements. Now, what happens in that process effectively is a lot of mathematics in the background. And the beauty of the maths is that it can work out which of your problems are your most pressing, and allows the software to identify what the #1 priority is for the energy manager, and therefore how best to deploy its resources. So 3 ways that data can be analyzed. #1, improved performance. Can the building's control techniques be improved? So if we look at governmental advice and building advice on how we should run a building, if it is a certain type of building, is our building performing as it should be with regards to those standards? We also can look at peer performance. So are buildings of a similar type performing the same as each other? So if you looked at a group of supermarkets, are all 24-hour supermarkets exhibiting the same patterns, or are some 24-hour supermarkets exhibiting different patterns? And finally, we can look at past performance. From that, what we can learn is how a building usually performs, and understand how it performs under certain conditions when looking at weather and other factors. And then when it changes away from that, we can understand either if something is going wrong, or it is a new norm, i.e. a new bakery was put into a supermarket. So a bit more about those in details. So looking at improving performance and peer performance, what we have here is a graph, and this is how software sees the data that's coming in, or it's visualized. And each of these dots here represents a site within a portfolio. And what we're looking at here is out of hours load reduction. So how much do you turn down when you're out of hours? And then a percentage of how low you are throughout the day. And what you can see is in this particular portfolio, it's a group of supermarkets, that there is a large variance in this particular data. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing if you've got 24-hour supermarkets and you've got non-24-hour supermarkets, but it gives a very good understanding of what is happening within a portfolio. So up the top of this chart where we've got the blue, you've got you're beating your goal that is set by the software, or at the bottom where you've got your reds, you've got potential for saving. So effectively what happens is anything in this C range here, where we're turning down to 80%, or 75 to 80%, we have a good off overnight for a long period of time. And then the further down we go, so this B area here, you've got 40 to 50% on overnight. And then finally, when we get down to this bottom here, where there's a very small turn down, you can see here that the pattern suggests that this is on 24/7 and is made clear. Now, as I said, in portfolios where you've got varied types of building, then this can be very normal. But if you've got groupings within those portfolios, say schools, you can look at this and you can use that to identify straight away which of your sites need to be looked at. So talking about tracking performance here, this chart, as I like to describe it, is one with sort of green squiggly lines and lots of different colored dots. But what it represents is the way the software is learning about your site. So each of these dots here represents a day of the week, and the green line represents what the software sees as the optimal for that building. What you'll notice is that this green line drops down to 0 on Saturdays. So the software learns that this building is in a low state of use or low state of consumption on Saturdays. You'll notice at the very end here where we've highlighted it, the software can identify obviously when it moves away from this model. Now this is obviously weather correlated, so we know that in summer, for instance, we're going to be using less than we are in winter, so it understands that, and then when it's looking at the changes, it can identify what moves away from what it believes is possible. Moving to the next slide, what we can see here is that the software has what it believes to be an achievable target in blue. So this is what it does under the current weather conditions. And then what is happening during what we call an event. So when the software detects a problem, it then highlights this in red to us. And we can see here that Saturday nights, it looks like they are consuming energy when they don't normally. And that enables it to be highlighted to the energy manager. And again, one of those things that we were talking about earlier is this mathematical generation and using the AI and pattern recognition. And what it enables us to do is to give a pound, shilling, and pence, or a carbon kilowatt hour figure of how much that waste is costing you, and then enables the prioritization of that to happen. So a couple of examples of the savings that we can look at and what we see. So one of the big ones is increasing turn down, and effectively that's one of the biggest things that we use the pattern recognition for, and often we start with our clients on this. And effectively, turn down, if no one's in a building, it's one of the most sensible things that you can start to look at. Very simple and very effective. Another one we look at and is very important in the UK is achievable balance temperature. And this moves on to quite an interesting situation as well as we move towards net zero. So usually buildings achieve balance temperature around the 17.5 degrees, a little bit above, a little bit below. And what we want is obviously where there is no requirement